Joining me now here on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America, Congressman Ben Cline, 6th District. Guess what? He's been in Congress just, 6 months. He just passed legislation, the Legion Act, passing the House, and the president signing it yesterday. And, boy, you're in Congress a couple months. You get a major bill passed, bipartisan bill, and he's joining us now, Congressman Ben Cline. Wow, congratulations.
Thanks, John. It was it was a big honor to get to work with so many across the aisle on the bill, and the president invited us up to get the bill signed into law on Tuesday, and it was a heady moment knowing that you're able to do some good things to help the men and women who fight for us every day.
Well, you got to be proud of what you've done because, one, you did a bipartisan bill. So I just want to inform our listeners the relationships you built over that are going to go a long way as you try to get other things actually done in Congress. So good job there. And like for a freshman to get a bill out of committee that they're the primary signature on, then get all the secondary backing with it is rarely done. And it's a good bill because, look, I know a lot of people that go to these that want to be members of the American Legion. I think the way you opened it up, and just if you could elaborate a little bit to our audience what your bill actually does, the Legion bill.
Yeah, so the American Legion, which is such a great organization, does so much in our communities of bringing veterans together and their families as well. But up until now, to be a member of the Legion, you had to be a veteran of a war or a conflict that was ongoing at the time, and if you were enlisted in peacetime, you were not able to join the Legion. So between World War II and Korea, between Korea and Vietnam, the Cold War vets, which wasn't officially recognized, you weren't able to join the Legion. This opens it up to all veterans. It's going to be a major shot in the arm for this group, which does such great work, and provide an opportunity for vets to come together and help each other, and it's going to be great. So I'm excited about it.
Well, you did an excellent job on that, and again, I congratulate you. Where did you get the inspiration for this?
Well, it was brought to us by the Legion. The Legion recognized that their membership was limited by the code, by the law, and they needed the law changed. So enough members of the Legion had kind of changed their mind about it and come around to the idea that just because you served under wartime instead of peacetime shouldn't prohibit you from joining the Legion. And so most of the great ideas that are passed through into law don't come from the minds of legislators. They come from out on the grassroots. And that's why I spend so much time in the grassroots. That's where a lot of ideas that I've worked in Virginia to put into law have come from.
Well, good job there, Congressman Ben Cline with us, Republican Congressman from the Virginia 6th District. That's basically the Lynchburg to Roanoke area. And serving there before Ben Cline was former House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte. Ben Cline, let's get to the president's budget deal, 2 years. Here's the good news, no government shutdown. It's good for Virginia. Bad news, another $4.1 trillion added to the debt with no end in sight whatsoever. No, appetite in D.C. for any austerity. No pay as you go. So the president signing it, you voted, I think you voted no. Why'd you vote against it, and where do we go from here?
Well, because I campaigned to bring some fiscal responsibility back to the swamp, and this bill did not do that. And I would call it Steve Mnuchin's deal that was forced on. The president did sign it, and Nancy Pelosi crowed about it in the House, but this was a deal that was passed over I think Mick Mulvaney was kind of pushed out of the room. He wasn't even allowed to present alternatives to the president. And, it's disappointing that we're just simply lifting budget caps and allowing essentially giving the credit card away and saying we're not going to worry about how much you spend over the next couple of years. We're just going to suspend the limits. Future generations of Americans, we owe it to them to get our fiscal house in order. And it means saying something that we've said in the House of Delegates for decades. We can't afford it. We can't afford to give raises to everybody all the time. We can't afford to do huge, massive infrastructure projects. We can't afford to have all these great bells and whistles in the budget because we balance the budget. We actually are careful stewards of taxpayer dollars in Virginia most of the time. And they need to get some of that in Washington, and that's what I've fought to do. And I'm going to keep fighting to bring our fiscal house in order as long as I'm in Congress.
Well, okay, so I get what you're trying to do, and I get that you voted no. The president's position is we've got to get through this election, and a government shutdown, which is always what looms, Ben, and the reality of it is just a political reality, is you have a government shutdown before an election, Republicans lose, Democrats win. We've been down this path several times. Anybody that's involved in this doesn't want anything to do with that. So that's what the president did. But, he said, if I get a second term, I'm going to address this. Here's one thing that you really have to look at. Not a single agency was cut in this bill. Not one dime. None of them stayed the same. Every single agency in the United States government, the federal government, got more money. Every single one right down the line. So there was a cherry on top of the cake for every single agency. If Trump gets, obviously, if a Democrat wins, forget about it. Trump gets reelected and you get a Republican Congress. I mean, when you say you went there for financial austerity and to bring some sanity back to this debt that we have, I mean, what do you envision? I mean, you just passed a bill. What do you envision? How would you ever get this deficit, this debt under control?
We've got to burst this bubble that is the swamp and drain it. And the way you do that is exactly what the president has started to do, just a trickle, but it's going to create momentum. And that is starting to take some of these agencies that have these high and mighty bureaucrats sitting in Washington, loving their multi-million-dollar homes out in Northern Virginia or Maryland and commuting in every day. We got to send them out. We got to send them outside the Beltway to real America and actually put them in St. Louis, which he's doing with some of the Interior Department agencies. But we've got to expand it. We've got to put the whole Interior Department in the interior. And you know what? When the lobbyists and the bureaucrats and they turn their noses up at moving out to Montana or Idaho or Sky Country, beautiful country out there, you know what? We'll have some people who are happy to go out there who actually know something about the interior and are anxious to work in the Interior Department. And I think that's going to save money, and it's also going to help drain the swamp in a way that's going to pop that mental bubble and start to realize we have to balance our budget and get our fiscal house in order. So that's going to be a good place to start.
Well, the first thing you have to do is get a Republican Congress in there, and you have to win control back of the House of Representatives. A lot of people are telling me, oh, they already had that. It doesn't matter. They're going to do the same thing. But and there is an argument there. So the frustrating part, Ben, for somebody like me, is a lot of my listeners are really losing faith that the Republicans are ever going to get anything done on that level. Because when I had the argument, I'd say, well, give Trump a second term, get the Republicans in charge. It's going to be different. A lot of my listeners are like, no, it isn't. It's going to be the same thing as it always is. They're going to continue to spend more money. And I'm like, well, that was Paul Ryan. And they're like, well, now you're going to get McCarthy. Like, there's no difference. So, I mean, one of the things you guys are going to have to do going into 2020 is convince your base that if you get another chance with a Republican Congress and a Republican President Trump, you're actually going to get something done. You're actually going to cut some money. You're actually going to get a wall done. How can you assure listeners that given a second chance, and I know you weren't there the first round, but given a second chance, the Republicans will actually get something done?
That's right. We've got to stop as a party promising one thing to cut government, and then so many of my colleagues go up to the swamp and actually vote to increase spending. That's something that, with the advent of social media and the internet, they're going to get called out on back in their districts for saying one thing and doing another. And we've, as a party, got to actually practice what we preach. And when we talk about fiscal responsibility, we've got to show it in the budgets that we put forward as Republican majority. The Senate needs to stop embracing this type of kick the can down the road. There's always going to be another election. And so to say, well, we've got to get through this election, well, then we're never going to get it done. So but I buy into the theory that you can do both. You can, by being upfront with people and saying we can't afford it, you can still get reelected, because honesty is in such short supply in Washington these days that voters actually recognize it and appreciate it. That's what we do in Richmond, and Republicans have said we can't afford it for 2 decades. We've had the majority for 2 decades, and Republicans get reelected because voters understand we have their priorities in mind, and one of those priorities is fiscal responsibility.
No, I think you're right. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to articulate that going into the fall yourself, and of course you're unscathed by it because you weren't part of the 2016 to 18 Republican majority that, other than the tax cut, really failed at everything else. Yesterday, the Fed lowered rates by 1/4 of a percentage point in a move that met market expectations, but the president not happy with it. He was relentlessly pressed the central bank to slash rates further. But look, Powell went down 1/4%. President wanted more. Who did the right thing? Did Powell do the right thing?
Yes. Well, cutting interest rates was necessary. We need to stimulate the economy. We've seen some slowing of growth, and we need to do that. I think he could have gone further because inflation is so far out into the future. We're just not seeing much sign of inflation out there. So go beyond 1/4 point, go 1/2 point, and if you start to see a rapid uptick in inflation, yeah, you can address it, but I don't see much sign of that on the horizon. So I think he could have been more aggressive.
Well, here's what the president tweeted out yesterday. We're with Ben Cline, House of Representatives, Congress member, 6th District, Virginia, Republican. That is the Lynchburg to Roanoke area. Congressman Cline, the president tweeted out yesterday what the market wanted to hear from Jay Powell, that's the Federal Reserve chair, was that the Federal Reserve was that this was the beginning of a lengthy and aggressive rate-cutting cycle, which would keep pace with China, the European Union, and other countries around the world. This is what the president tweeted out. So he wanted this cut, plus he wanted Powell to say that this was going to be a trend in additional cuts, as you have just suggested. He didn't get that, but he did get a cut. And so, look, Powell...
And that may be what Powell's coming up to, is next round we'll get another 1/4 point cut, and next round we'll get another 1/4 point cut. So we could be seeing the beginning of that trend. I hope we do. And that'll keep the economy churning along at this great rate that we've seen, and jobs are being created, and businesses are growing, manufacturing's coming back home. We got to get these deals with China cut and get these tariffs off. And when we do, it'll be 2020. It'll be a banner year for the economy.
The president overriding the veto of arms sales to the Saudis the other day. The Senate rejected that. The president overriding and continues on with our arms deal with the Saudis. Do you favor that, or do you believe the Senate was right in trying to curtail that? Ben Cline.
Well, I think that the president has an ally in the Saudis in that region. He needs to maintain that relationship, and so they are fighting terrorism in their own backyard, and so I think it's appropriate that we have that relationship, and that includes arms sales. So I think the president was right to veto it, and I'm glad that it was not overridden.
Let's go to Iran and the saber rattling that's going on. The president and the Treasury Department laying out another series of sanctions, this time on their foreign minister. My take on it, I thought it was odd because I don't really know the foreign minister of Iran owns any land or has any money in the United States or other European countries. But the foreign minister is who they're negotiating with. Now you put sanctions on him. I don't know how you put sanctions on the guy and then negotiate. So I mean, I was taken aback by that, and I'm holding criticism because I don't have enough information. I was on the press conference call yesterday, and it just didn't make any sense to me. But the bigger picture is this: the sanctions with Iran are working, but what is the goal here? What does the president want the Iranian regime to do in order to get back, for both of us to get back to the negotiating table? In your mind, what's the objective?
Well, stop their support of terrorism and stop their efforts to spread it around the world and stop their efforts to accrue a nuclear arsenal and undermine the West, continue advocating for the destruction of the United States, for the destruction of Israel. I mean, they are one of the most active supporters of terrorism, state-supported terrorism in the world. They are not our friend, and we need to continue to keep the pressure on it because it's working. And that's why they're flailing about. That's why you see them acting out on the international stage in the Persian Gulf, is because these sanctions are working, their economy is tanking, and the president needs to keep his foot on the gas, and eventually we will see either a change in attitude or a change in leadership that will lead to improved relations with the United States.
All right, we're with Ben Cline. Final question, Ben. Ben Cline, a House of Representatives member, Virginia, 6th District, Republican, first term. He replaced Bob Goodlatte, who retired. That is the Lynchburg to Roanoke area for those listening to us nationally. And you want to get context here. Freshman Congressman Ben Cline just got a major bill passed, the American Legion bill. Very impressed with that. That means I can go hang out at the Legion, so I'm fired up about it. Give me something to do on the weekends while everybody's away sometimes. So Ben, let me just ask you this. Let's get to your colleague, Ilhan Omar. She sent a tweet out the other day. She retweeted a tweet, I know you've seen this, from Tom Arnold, basically advocating violence against Republican Senator Rand Paul. When I first saw the tweet and the retweet, I thought it was one of those things like you make up, like you see in The Onion, where people will like do a fake tweet and send it out. I thought there's no way that a sitting member of Congress would ever retweet this out, suggesting violence against a U.S. senator. But then, of course, it's been verified it was her, and she doubled down on it. I mean, you serve with Senator Rand Paul. He was attacked and suffered greatly on his own lawn while cutting the grass by a neighbor who's going to jail. Just give me your reaction to this, Ilhan Omar, this Congresswoman Omar, sending a tweet out encouraging violence. I mean, she could have done that against Ben Cline and his family. What did you make of that, honestly, Congressman?
Well, I haven't seen it. I have heard about it, and you never know. You see AOC's chief of staff out tweeting on his own, and he's speaking as if he's a member of Congress sometimes, trying to encourage primaries against other Democrats, and you never know who's behind the Twitter feed. So right. Don't know if Omar's the one retweeting or if it's her chief of staff or if it's some staffer who hopefully made an error and is going to apologize for it, because that kind of rhetoric has no place in the halls of Congress, and we need to kind of understand that actions have consequences, and this kind of action, retweeting this kind of aggressive statement encouraging violence, it does nothing to help us solve the problems facing this country. And that's, she's on the Education and Labor Committee with me. She has an entirely different point of view about where we should go on education policy, on labor policy. You know, I'm happy getting the federal government out of education policy, but she wants to increase that. So we've got a difference of opinion, and we just need to lower the rhetoric and talk through our problems so that we can address them more directly.
Final question. Did you find the recent tweets by President Trump directed towards Elijah Cummings and the fact that he represents a dilapidated neighborhoods in West Baltimore, did you find those to be racially offensive, Congressman?
Well, I think that the president is calling out failed policies over the past 20, 30 years, the conditions of cities across this country. And we need to, I think that he's got a podium that enables him to highlight the problems in those cities, and he's taking advantage of that podium. And so I know that he has sent his cabinet secretaries to Baltimore to try and find out ways that he can help the people of Baltimore. And I credit him for that. I think that that's great. The more we can do to change things on the ground in the cities across this country, the more we can improve the lives for every American, and we should continue to try and do that.
Congressman Ben Cline, we're out of time. Congressman, Republican Ben Cline, 6th District, Virginia.